So, growing up in the city was an experience in and of itself. I mean, if any of this is redundant, I apologize because in 1998 I suffered a near fatal head injury that nobody believed in and fell and busted my head on the top of a pipe that was shaped somewhat like a club. It was used as a handle on a cart at this hotel on Capitol Hill, and the banquet waiters left water all over the floor, and I slipped sideways, and the side of my head, which could also be considered face, a little off center of my temple, slammed down with 225 pounds minus the weight of my head, I guess you could say. And my head went up toward the ceiling and my body went down toward the floor. And that's how I bounced off of the top of this pole and ended up down on the floor, temporarily blacked out. That was exacerbated by sleeping in the front seat of a rental car in 2020 at a rest stop when a Toyota 4Runner rammed into the side of the door, the driver's side door, T-boning me in a parking spot while he was making this wild exit off of a C-shaped ramp and lost control and just drove straight into the door, and I bounced off the door and ended up somewhere between the door and the seat. So a lot of times my memory gets skewed and I get lost. So if this is redundant, I'm sorry. But it's in keeping with telling this story. So, like, growing up in Washington, D.C., born on the swamps of Georgetown, where the bottom is foggy and the mist permeates the shore, so much so they had to build up M Street another level so that some of the buildings actually have two basements. They have a basement and a sub-basement because the foundation of a lot of land there was sinking into the swamps. I was born on the swamps of D.C., and I survived the Martin Luther King Jr. riots and gangs every 5 blocks and stuff like that. My mother would send me away to camp down on the peninsula of Rock Point, Maryland, where the road ends at the Wicomico River, emptying out into the Chesapeake Bay. And it was there that I spent multiple summers at a camp named after a guy called St. Charles. Or maybe it's not a guy. But the first camp I went to was Camp Britson. And I went there a couple of times before being transferred to a place that was closer. My mom was very dutiful in making sure that I didn't grow up hoodlum and end up in prison or worse, even though I defied those attempts and spent a lot of time in the street. At these times I couldn't spend in the street. And at this camp, St. Charles, we were on the Wicomico River. We learned I learned how to operate inboard motorboats and outboard motorboats. We had this boat. It was a reformed, transformed mailboat, and it was called the Herc. And this place was run by the Salvadorian fathers, and it had this huge meeting hall with the tower and typical looking place that they called a church, that had this huge bell up in the tower. And one of the novelties that easily amused me was ringing this bell for different reasons and different occasions. So us would compete in running to ring this bell. And a lot of the memories there were out of control. I mean, there were all kinds of things going on there. We had a dock that had a series of about 12 to 14 rowboats, and that had canoes, and it had this, later on it had this structure at the end of the dock on land called the crab pit. And anytime we caught crabs, we would put them in there for the annual crab feast at the end of a semester of camp, which usually lasted about 2 or 3 weeks. And it was there I learned how to swim, or one of the places I learned how to swim. We had campfires, campouts. We slept in cabins and bunk beds made of steel. We took foot lockers full of clothing, and those were put at the end of at the bottom of the bed. One kid had the kid on the top bunk had his on the side up by the head of the bed, and the kid on the bottom bunk put his at the foot of the bed. And we had inspections to make sure that our clothes were folded up. It was almost like quasi-militaristic. And we got up at a certain time, we got showered. We had to learn hospital corners, or how to make hospital corners on our bed. We had cabin inspections to make sure that our beds were clean, that no kid's bed had sand in it. And we had these priests that would come around and do these inspections. And I don't quite remember how many cabins there were. It was about 8 or 9, I guess. And they went from the younger kids to the older kids, who were the seniors, up until about 16 or something like that. Memory escapes me. But we had the young kids, then the kids about, I want to say 9 or 10, 11, 12, up to about 16. And we would have these cabin inspections, and whoever won, there were like 3 different sections of kids classified into 3 different sections. The 16-year-olds being the seniors, of course. And so each section got an award, like canteen or some days off of the regiment that we were living by. And we had like a huge communal shower where different sections would take showers between a certain time period in the morning, and you only had so many minutes to shower. Like, I think it was like 5 or 10 minutes. Shower, brush your teeth, and get ready for breakfast. Breakfast was in this huge cabin communal hall, and we sat at these tables, and everybody had a responsibility, a daily responsibility. It was always rotated to a different person. Collect the glasses, empty the glasses in this trough. Everybody had to finish their drinks, get water, then your choice of milk or 2 juices, and they brought out eggs and bacon and toast and things like that, and we'd all sit, at these long tables, about 15 kids to a side or something like that, and that's how we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And my mom paid for me to go to this camp, and we had a swimming pool, we learned about animals, we had a huge communal area out in the woods that was surrounding a fire in a circle, and we would all meet there for different events, award ceremonies. We had a rifle range where we learned how to shoot 22 caliber rifles once you reached a certain age, and if you were below that age, you went to the BB gun range. And it was high marks for transitioning from BB guns to 22s. I remember I received pro marksman first class, and then we had like an archery range where we learned to string bows to shoot arrows, and we would learn gun safety. We would learn bow and arrow safety. We would learn watercraft safety and the outboard and inboard motors. We had this tri-hull outboard motor boat that you could actually sit on the very nose of and hold on to a rope and ride it like a bronco. We learned about wearing life vests and small craft and large craft safety. We learned how to survive boat explosions, where if you were in a water permeated with oil that was on fire, you learned how to clear the fiery oil over top of your head. We learned how to make life preservers out of our pants. And this river, the Wicomico River, was infested with jellyfish and or aka sea nettles and crabs and fish, but very rarely saw fish. And we had nets and fishing rods and all this other equipment, paddles and rowboat oars and things like that. And we learned how to utilize all these different tools and equipment during the summer that we stayed there. And at the end of the summer, they would have an award ceremony, and a bunch of kids were chosen to dress up in feathers and bells and war paint and stuff like that, and perform an Indian ceremony. And every year they would find some ingenious way to light this huge bonfire in the center of our log seats that were out in the middle of the woods, circling this fire. It was like a pit. And one year, this priest came up with this ingenious method where he took a bunch of stick matches, a couple of hundred, and wrapped them up, and then he took 2 ends of electrical cable, and he dug a small canal in the dirt that went all the way to the fireplace, and doused the fireplace with gasoline and wrapped the wire around these matches. And the ceremony, I was part of that ceremony. By then I was a senior, and so the wire was buried, and the other end was up underneath this huge bonfire doused with gasoline, with these huge logs that were stacked up all on top of each other to about 4 or 5 feet. And the beginning of the award ceremony, and when they would give notoriety to kids that had excelled in archery and riflery and other activities, they would start the ceremony with the Indians coming out, and they would summon them out in a formal ceremony, telling all the kids, that the natives of that area had come to acknowledge us, and they would tell ghost stories there. I remember there was this story about this guy named Hatchet Harry, who was a detective who had fought this Chinese clan called the Tong or something, and they had these poison hatchets, and one was lodged in his forehead, and it couldn't be removed or he'd die, but it drove him crazy or something, so they took the handle out and left the hatchet part in his head, and that he haunted those woods. There were all kinds of stories like that about the Lancaster farm. So it was at that time that these kind of events were going on, and at this particular event, the priest that was dressed up as the Indian chief came out and was telling the story of the Indians in that area and the time that they inhabited the area, and he called upon their spirits to light the fire, and he made this great speech. "Oh, spirits of the Indian dead, hear our cry and illuminate us with your pyre." And they took this car battery and they touched the other ends of this electrical wire on it, and at first it wasn't doing anything. All of a sudden the fire just came on, and all the kids just kind of freaked out. At other times they would have I remember it not working that well, but they had a arrow that was on fire, and they would shoot the arrow into the fireplace, but it was still doused with gasoline so that it would ignite easy. And they had kindling down in the center, a bunch of kindling, stuff like that. So that was one of the events that they had. They had an arts and craft shop that we learned how to preserve bugs and clear lucite, and we actually had a kiln where we blasted ceramics. And me always wanting to find out why you shouldn't do something, we were taught you had to put at least 3 coats of paint on your ceramics or they wouldn't come out right. So one year I tried 2 coats, and it came out motley. It was kind of calico patched, so it didn't come out well at all. But we learned how to mix clay and pour it in molds and put the 2 halves of the molds together with car or bicycle tire cut into bands, and that would hold it together. And then we would pour the clay mold in there, and we would end up letting it sit and dry, and then taking it out and sanding it, and then painting it with the ceramic paint and putting it in the kiln and blasting it. And we did watercolor painting and all kind of stuff. I mean, this place was it had no end of things to do. During the middle of the day, we had what was known as canteen, and we would take breaks and get one soda and a candy or ice cream, and that's all you got. You didn't get to have any more than that. Uh, they always gave us a choice of a couple of items or something like that, and we had like track and field, 40-yard dash, 90-yard dash, 880-yard relay, cross country. We played baseball, football, dodgeball, and they had animals there, a sheep called Lambert, lamb. They had sheep there. One year they got horses. They were always coming up with different ideas. We learned beginner, advanced beginner, novice, intermediate, swimmer, and then junior life, senior life in the swimming pool. Juxtaposed the small craft and large craft safety. Small craft safety, we had to swamp something like a canoe or a rowboat and actually turn it upside down, and then right it and get the water out of it. And as I was saying earlier, turn our pants into life preservers by tying knots in the end, zipping it up, snapping it, and then splashing water till it filled up with air. We had to learn how to save lives, save our own lives, save the lives of different individuals, using paddles to save lives from the dock. We would, from time to time, a bunch of us would get in rowboats and canoes and go to this island and camp out overnight. And I remember one summer, this kid fell asleep with no insect repellent on his forehead, and he woke up and his forehead looked like a population of pimples. And we would camp out on this island on the beach in sleeping bags and build a fire, and we'd cook our food over the sleeping bags. And all this was under the supervision of these priests. There was just so much to do at this place. And I remember when I was about 19, I might have told this part, I applied for a job there. And come to find out that the child in me hadn't left. And I was supposed to be like a supervisor, junior counselor type of a guy, and I just couldn't do it. We were there about 2-3 weeks before camping season started, and we had to get all the cobwebs off the places and air them out and kill all the daddy long legs that populated the cabins. And I remember this one year I was there, I think it was during my last year, the kids used to do what was known as cabin raids, where they would just go into a cabin and they shoot your bed full of shaving foam, dump all the lockers out on the floor or something. They do this while nobody was looking. And it was crazy. I think the seniors were well known for that, where they would just, while everybody was occupied elsewhere, and this usually happened at night, people were occupied elsewhere, seniors would sneak off and they'd raid a cabin and they just destroy it. I mean, you come in there and your blankets are thrown over the rafters and mattresses are turned over and all kinds of stuff. And no one ever knew who did it. It was always a mystery how to find out who did this. Sometimes I suspected the priests. But one night we found out that that was going to happen, and our cabin was, as freshmen there, our cabin was kind of unique in that our our front door handle was kind of messed up. So I knew how to make it so that you couldn't get in the cabin and lock it, and I also knew how to unlock it and get it open. And nobody knew how to do this but me. And so one night we got wind that the seniors were going to raid our cabin and destroy it. And so I locked the door, and not even the cabin master. Every cabin had a cabin master. He slept in a separate room off in the back, and we slept all in a common room. And that was it. The toilet was out the door and around the corner, and in the center of all the cabins, in the shower hall and all, where all the sinks and everything and the toilets were. And one night, I locked that door, and we came back from an affair. I don't remember what it was. It was a ceremony or something. And there was shaving cream all over the windows and all over the front door and lipstick and all this other stuff. And they were absolutely pissed because they could not get in our cabin to raid it and destroy it. And everyone was like lauding me for saving us the trauma of having to spend 2 hours cleaning the cabin in the middle of the night. So like when I turned 19, all this stuff came back to me, and we were getting ready for the summer, and we were preparing the grounds and cutting grass and doing all the hard labor so that the kids could come and enjoy their summer there. And I just got flashbacks, and so I was just all over that place once the season started and the kids got there. I was a kid again. I wasn't acting responsible at all. I was having the fun of a lifetime. I mean, it was crazy. So after about 2 weeks and 2 or 3 reprimands, this priest called me into their central hall where they sleep, the ones that don't sleep in the cabins with us. And I walk in this room, and there's like 13 to 15 of these guys sitting around. And they asked me to come in, and they said, they looked at me and they said, well, we're sorry, but we're going to have to let you go because everybody said you had changed, but your cabin master, Brother Bob, he said, no, this guy hasn't changed. It's the same person. You don't want to hire this guy. And lo and behold, they said, we were wrong and he was right. We just can't have you here. You're not a good example to the kids. Man, I never held back tears so strong in my life. With Herculean effort, I held back the tears and waited till I got home. It was a long drive home. They took me home. I didn't speak the entire way to the guy that was driving me. And when we got to my place, he was like, well, here we go. And I just got out, shut the door, didn't look back, went in the house, and was crushed. But that was Camp St. Charles. That was where I spent my summers as a child. I had nothing but fond memories of that place up until that crush. And even that crush won't destroy the memories I had of that place. I mean, I learned how to canoe, rowboat. I mean, we played. Very rarely did we fight. I don't remember very many fights, as a matter of fact. But I remember the fun, the fanfare, the pageantry, climbing up in trees that were like 6 to 8 stories tall and making noise, scaring the living bejesus out of kids and stuff like that. I mean, that place was awesome. And that is a memory that I will never, ever forget, even if I become senile.